The starship Vanguard cut through the purple haze of Tornatha's atmosphere like a dagger, descending toward the rugged terrain below. Kira Arden sat in the cockpit, her fingers drumming against the armrest of her seat. This wasn't her first deployment, but it felt different. The planet Tornath was a lawless wasteland, where only the most hardened mercenaries and criminals thrived. A place where survival was dictated not by who you were, but by how fast you could draw your weapon. As the ship landed with a jarring thud, Kira stood up and glanced at her reflection in the small mirror by the door. Her short brown hair was tied back tightly, her eyes sharp and alert. The scars on her left cheek, a reminder of her first mission on Earth's lunar outpost, caught the dim light. She adjusted the strap of her combat vest, checking her gear one last time: twin energy blades, a sidearm, and a small blade concealed in her boot. It wasn't much compared to the firepower others carried, but it had always been enough for her. The ramp lowered, and the metallic clang of her boots hitting the ground echoed in the oppressive silence of the planet's surface. Kira took in her surroundings: the towering black mountains, the swirling violet mist that clung to the ground, and the distant outline of a mercenary camp. It was a place where reputations were made or broken, and she was determined to make hers. The cantina was the heart of the camp. A rundown, low-lit bunker where mercenaries of all species gathered between jobs, either to drink away the memories of their past or to barter for the next high-paying contract. As Kira approached, the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and shouted insults leaked through the steel door. She pushed it open and stepped inside. Immediately, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations hushed as the mercenaries inside turned to stare at the newcomer. Kira was used to the stares. She was an anomaly in this world: human, young, and a woman, all qualities that made her a target for those who judged her by appearance alone. She scanned the room quickly. The cantina was filled with mercenaries from all corners of the galaxy. Hulking Valgorians with their 4 muscular arms and thick bronze skin, sleek reptilian Aloxians, whose eyes glowed yellow in the dim light, and a scattering of other species, each more dangerous than the last. They were all seasoned warriors, wearing their battle scars and cybernetic enhancements like trophies. And then there was Kira, standing alone in her unremarkable combat gear, a stark contrast to the heavily armored giants around her. "Hey, look what we have here," a voice sneered from across the room. Kira didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She had felt his gaze from the moment she walked in. The Aloxian mercenary sitting at the far end of the bar. His scaly, greenish-blue skin shimmered under the low lights as he leaned back in his chair, his long tail flicking lazily behind him. His fangs glinted in a cruel smile. "A little human girl, wandering into the wrong place," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. His comrades, a group of similarly intimidating mercenaries, snickered. Kira caught the glance of a Valgorian to her left, who sized her up with a grin that could only be described as predatory. Kira ignored them at first. She strode to the bar, ordering a drink with a casual wave of her hand. Her heartbeat quickened, but she kept her face calm, her posture relaxed. She had learned early on that showing fear was a death sentence in places like this. The Aloxian stood up, his towering figure blocking out the light as he approached her. "You lost, little one," he hissed, leaning over her. His breath smelled like raw meat and alcohol. The snickers grew louder as the other mercenaries waited for her response, their amusement clear. Kira glanced sideways, meeting the Aloxian's glowing eyes for the first time. His expression was one of disdain, as if her mere presence was an insult. "I'm where I need to be," she said, her voice steady. "But you're in my way." The Aloxian's grin faltered for a moment, replaced by a flash of irritation. He was used to intimidation working without effort. He puffed out his chest, towering over her with his claws flexing menacingly. "You've got guts, kid," he snarled. "But guts won't keep you alive here. How about you crawl back to whatever soft planet you came from before someone decides to show you your place?" Kira's fingers twitched toward the knife on her belt, but she kept them still. She knew better than to escalate without reason. Still, The tension in the room thickened as more eyes turned to her, waiting for the confrontation they could sense brewing. The Aloxian's grin widened as he saw the hesitation in her eyes, or what he thought was hesitation. He turned to his comrades, laughing loudly. "See? I told you. Humans are all the same. Weak. Soft. Can't handle the real fight." He poked a clawed finger against her chest, a challenge more than an insult. The room was silent now. Even the bartender had stepped back, clearly not wanting to get caught in whatever was about to happen. Kira moved faster than the Aloxian could react. With a swift motion, she grabbed his wrist and twisted it sharply, pulling him off balance. In the same movement, she slammed her elbow into his gut, sending him stumbling backward. Before he could regain his footing, Kira delivered a hard kick to his knee, forcing him down onto one leg. The other mercenaries were on their feet now, but no one moved. They were waiting, watching, to see if the human could back up her bravado. The Aloxian roared in fury and lunged at her, his claws swiping toward her face. But Kira was already a step ahead. She ducked under his strike, spinning behind him, and with one swift movement, she swept his legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of him. Kira stepped over him, placing the tip of her knife against his throat. She looked around at the watching crowd, her expression calm and cold. "I'm not here to play games," she said evenly, her voice carrying across the room. "I'm here to work. You don't have to like me, but if you get in my way, you'll regret it." The Aloxian growled beneath her, but he didn't move. Kira pressed the knife slightly harder against his skin, a silent warning. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she sheathed the blade and stepped back, leaving the Aloxian to scramble to his feet, his pride wounded more than his body. The cantina remained quiet for a few moments longer, then the tension broke. Some mercenaries nodded in acknowledgement, while others turned back to their drinks, clearly impressed. The Aloxian's comrades pulled him away, muttering curses under their breath, but no one made a move to challenge her again. Kira exhaled, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, but she kept her expression neutral. She returned to the bar and picked up her untouched drink. She didn't need their respect, not yet, but she had shown them she wasn't someone to underestimate. As she sipped her drink, the murmurs around the room shifted. They weren't laughing at her anymore. Kira's takedown of the Aloxian had made waves. She could feel it in the way the other mercenaries watched her, now silent, calculating, and more cautious than before. She had earned a sliver of respect, but it was fragile, teetering on the edge of contempt. One wrong move, one show of weakness, and it would all crumble. Mercenary life was not about one victory, it was about proving yourself over and over again until no one dared question your right to stand among them. The day after the cantina incident, Kira was summoned by Captain Draxon, the leader of the Blackfangs, one of the most feared mercenary crews in the sector. Draxon's reputation had spread far beyond the edges of Tornath, his name whispered with equal parts reverence and fear. He had led countless successful campaigns, taken down planetary defenses with a mere handful of fighters, and ruthlessly eliminated any who challenged his dominance. Kira approached the Blackfang's base, a fortified structure carved into the jagged cliffs of Tornath, overlooking the vast wasteland below. The sky was a violent swirl of purples and reds, the atmosphere thick with ionized particles that made the very air feel charged. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her as she climbed the steep path to the entrance. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a test. Draxon didn't call people to him for casual conversation. 2 hulking Valgorian guards stood at the entrance, their forearms crossed over their massive chests. They eyed Kira with suspicion but stepped aside as she approached. The metal door slid open with a hiss, revealing a large, dimly lit chamber inside. The walls were lined with weapons and trophies, alien skulls, broken blades, and fragments of armor from fallen enemies. A display of Draxon's countless victories. At the center of the room, Draxon stood with his back to her, his massive form silhouetted against the glowing tactical map projected on the wall. His skin was black as obsidian, smooth and polished like stone, and his eyes when he turned to face her burned with a deep red glow, like smoldering embers. Kira Arden, Draxon's voice was low, rumbling like a distant storm. You've made quite an impression. Kira remained still, meeting his gaze without flinching. She knew better than to speak first. Draxon's gaze lingered on her, weighing her, judging her. The silence in the room was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the tactical display. You embarrassed an Aloxian in front of half the camp, Draxon continued, stepping toward her slowly. Bold. Foolish, maybe. But bold. I didn't come here to be mocked, Kira said evenly, keeping her posture relaxed but ready. I came to work. Draxon's lip curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. Work, you say? That's what all the young mercenaries say when they arrive here. But they don't last long. You're not the first human to set foot on Tornath, but you may be the first one to survive more than a week. Most get eaten alive sometimes, literally. I'm not like most, Kira replied. Draxon's smile widened slightly, but there was no warmth in it. He turned away from her and gestured to a hulking figure standing in the shadows at the edge of the room. Kira hadn't noticed him at first, but as he stepped forward into the light, she felt the full weight of his presence. Krull. He was a Psychron, one of the most feared species in the galaxy, known for their brute strength and relentless aggression. His skin was a deep gray, almost metallic, with veins of glowing red energy pulsing beneath the surface. His body was a mass of muscle and cybernetic enhancements, each one designed to amplify his already formidable strength. He towered over Kira, easily 3 times her size, with fists that could probably crush her skull in a single blow. Krull here is one of my best, Draxon said, his tone casual, as if he were discussing the weather. If you want to prove yourself worthy of working for the Blackfangs, you'll have to show me you can handle a real fight. Kira's pulse quickened, but she kept her breathing steady. She had expected a challenge, but Krull was a walking fortress. A direct fight against him would be suicide. But Draxon wasn't interested in fairness. He was interested in seeing if she had what it took to survive in the brutal world of mercenary warfare. Krull cracked his knuckles, his lips curling into a savage grin. You think you can fight me, human? His voice was deep, a low growl that reverberated through the chamber. I'll break you in half. Kira didn't respond. Instead, she loosened her stance, her fingers twitching toward the hilts of her twin energy blades. She didn't have the luxury of brute strength, but she had speed and precision on her side. And she knew how to think under pressure. Draxon raised his hand, signaling the start of the fight. Krull moved faster than she expected for someone his size. He lunged at her with terrifying speed, his fists crashing down toward her like hammers. Kira barely dodged, rolling to the side as the ground where she had stood moments before shattered under the force of his blow. The impact sent a shockwave through the chamber, but Kira kept moving, using her agility to stay out of his reach. Krull roared, swinging again, his massive fists aiming for her head. Kira ducked under his arm, slashing at his exposed side with one of her blades. The energy weapon cut through his armor, but the wound barely slowed him down. He swung back at her with a wild fury, and Kira had to leap backward to avoid being crushed. You're fast, Krull growled, his glowing red eyes locked on her. But that won't save you. He charged again, this time with more precision. Kira dodged, but Krull anticipated her move and swung his arm back, catching her across the chest with enough force to send her flying into the wall. Pain exploded through her body as she hit the hard surface, but she forced herself to roll to her feet before Krull could follow up with another attack. She couldn't win by running. She had to find a way to disable him fast. Krull came at her again, but this time, Kira was ready. As he swung, she ducked low, driving one of her blades into the joint of his knee. Krull howled in pain as sparks flew from the damaged cybernetics. He staggered, giving Kira the opening she needed. With a quick leap, she vaulted onto his back, her blades flashing as she slashed at the base of his neck where the cybernetic enhancements connected to his spinal cord. Kroll roared, thrashing wildly, but Kira held on, driving her blade deeper into the exposed circuitry. Kroll's movements slowed as his systems began to fail, his body twitching with electrical surges. With one final strike, Kira severed the main connection, and Kroll collapsed to the ground with a thunderous crash. The room was silent except for the sound of Kira's labored breathing. She stood over Kroll's fallen form, her blade still humming with energy, her chest rising and falling with the effort of the fight. Draxon watched her with a look of mild amusement, his eyes glinting with approval. "Impressive," he said, stepping forward slowly. "I didn't think you'd last a minute against him." Kira wiped the sweat from her brow, meeting Draxon's gaze without flinching. "I told you," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping into her muscles. "I'm not here to play games." Draxon's smile returned, this time with a hint of genuine respect. "No," he said quietly, "you're not." He stepped closer, his towering figure casting a long shadow over her. "You've earned a place among the Blackfangs," he said. "But understand this, Kira. This was just the first test. There will be more. And if you fail, well, no one survives failure in my crew." Kira nodded, already preparing herself for whatever came next. She knew this was only the beginning. But she had passed the first test and now, she was one step closer to proving she belonged. As Draxon turned away, Kira felt the weight of the challenge ahead settle over her. But she was ready. She had to be. Because in this world, weakness was death. And Kira Arden had no intention of dying. Weeks had passed since Kira's brutal trial with Kroll. The Blackfangs, once dismissive of her, now eyed her with a mix of curiosity and grudging respect. In the mercenary world, reputation was everything, and Kira had begun to forge hers through sheer grit and relentless determination. But she knew that one victory wasn't enough if she wanted to survive, she had to rise, and rise fast. Her days with the Blackfangs were a whirlwind of missions, each more dangerous than the last. They took on contracts others wouldn't dare touch, covert operations deep in enemy territory, high-risk heists from fortified planetary vaults, and assassination missions that required more than just brute force. Kira's skills as a tactician and her ability to remain calm under fire quickly set her apart from the other recruits. Her reputation continued to grow after a mission that brought them deep into the Trovax Nebula, a lawless region teeming with pirates and slavers. Their target was a rival mercenary crew holed up in an abandoned mining facility on the planet Zorith. It was a trap from the start. Draxon's contacts had failed to mention that the mining complex had been fortified with heavy defense systems and automated drones. Worse, the rival crew had anticipated their arrival, setting up an ambush. It was a bloodbath. Kira had fought alongside the Blackfangs in tight quarters, the corridors filled with blaster fire and the screams of the wounded. She remembered the way the air had smelled of scorched metal and burning flesh, the way the walls had shuddered as explosions tore through the facility. She had led a small team through a side tunnel, avoiding the main confrontation, only to run straight into the heart of the enemy's stronghold. Most would have retreated at that point, but not Kira. Thinking quickly, she used the facility's old mining drones to create a distraction, sending them barreling through the tunnels and causing chaos among the rival mercenaries. In the confusion, Kira and her team took out the enemy leadership, turning what had been a suicide mission into a decisive victory. Draxon had been impressed, though he hadn't said much. With him, silence was approval enough. After that mission, Kira was no longer seen as a recruit. She had become a key member of the crew, trusted to lead operations and take on jobs that required more than brute force. Her ability to blend strategy with combat set her apart from the others, many of whom relied purely on physical strength or superior firepower. She had earned her place, but with each step up the ladder, the challenges only grew more severe. It wasn't long before Kira began to attract unwanted attention. Her rapid rise in the Blackfang stirred jealousy and resentment among some of the more seasoned mercenaries. Many of them had fought with Draxon for years, and they saw Kira's success as a threat to their own standing. Among them was Krev, a Goric warrior with a reputation for being as ruthless as he was unpredictable. Krev was massive, even by Goric standards, with dark blue skin that rippled with muscle and a pair of gleaming tusks that protruded from his lower jaw. His eyes were cold and calculating, and he rarely spoke unless it was to issue a challenge. For weeks, he had watched Kira from a distance, his disdain obvious. He wasn't the type to back down from a fight, and Kira knew it was only a matter of time before their paths crossed in a way that would end in blood. The tension came to a head one evening in the Blackfang's training hall. The hall was a massive, open space filled with combat simulators, weight stations, and sparring rings. It was where the mercenaries honed their skills between missions, and it was often the site of unofficial duels settling grudges and establishing dominance without Draxon's intervention. Kira was in the middle of a hand-to-hand sparring session with another Blackfang, a Zyrosian with obsidian skin like Draxon's, when Krev approached. His heavy footsteps reverberated through the hall, and the room fell silent as he stopped just outside the ring, his arms crossed over his chest. Kira felt his gaze on her like a physical weight, and she knew what was coming. The Zyrosian sparring partner noticed Krev's presence and quickly backed off, giving Kira a nod of respect before retreating. Now it was just Kira and Krev, the rest of the Blackfangs watching with bated breath. This wasn't an official challenge, but everyone knew what was about to happen. In mercenary culture, challenges were often issued through action, not words. Krev stepped into the ring, towering over her. His voice was low and gravelly. "You've been getting a lot of attention lately, human. Think you're better than the rest of us?" Kira stood her ground, her muscles tensing. "I think I'm here to do a job, just like everyone else." Krev bared his tusks in what could only be described as a grin. "Funny. Because from where I stand, it looks like you're trying to take what isn't yours." Kira didn't flinch. "If you've got a problem with me, Krev, we can settle it right here." That was all he needed to hear. With a roar, Krev charged, his massive fists swinging toward her like wrecking balls. Kira dodged to the side, her reflexes sharp, but she could feel the air from his strike whip past her face. Krev was fast for his size, and every hit he landed would be devastating. He swung again, and this time Kira ducked low, sliding between his legs and kicking out at his knee. Krev stumbled but didn't fall, spinning around with surprising agility and throwing a backhanded strike that caught Kira in the shoulder, sending her skidding across the floor. Pain flared through her arm, but she bit back the groan, rolling to her feet before he could follow up. Krev was on her in an instant, his fists a blur. Kira had to move fast, dodging and weaving between his attacks, looking for an opening. He was stronger, but she was faster, and she knew if she could outlast him, his brute force would eventually wear him down. She waited for him to overcommit, and when he did, throwing a wild punch, she ducked under his arm and drove her fist into his ribs. He grunted, more annoyed than hurt, but Kira wasn't done. She followed up with a quick series of strikes to his side and back, targeting his pressure points with precision. Krev swung again, but this time, Kira caught his arm, using his momentum to flip him over her shoulder and onto the ground with a resounding thud. The room erupted in a mixture of gasps and low murmurs. No one had expected Kira to hold her own, much less take Krev down. Krev lay on the ground for a moment, breathing heavily. His face twisted into a scowl as he pushed himself up, but before he could stand fully, Kira placed her boot on his chest, pinning him to the ground. She met his furious gaze with cold determination. "This isn't about who's better," Kira said, her voice calm but firm. "This is about survival. I don't need to take anything from you, Krev. I've earned my place here." Krev growled, but after a tense moment, he stopped struggling. Kira stepped back, letting him rise, and the two of them stood facing each other in silence. There was no need for words. The challenge had been issued, and Kira had won. From the shadows of the hall, Draxon watched with his usual inscrutable expression. Kira met his gaze briefly, but he gave no sign of approval or disapproval. Still, the fact that he had let the duel play out told Kira everything she needed to know. The Blackfangs, and perhaps even Draxon himself, now saw her not as an outsider, but as one of their own. Kira's victory over Kref solidified her standing within the crew, but it also marked the beginning of a new phase in her journey. The more she climbed, the more dangerous her enemies became both within the crew and beyond. She knew that her rapid rise had painted a target on her back, and there were plenty who would take any opportunity to bring her down. But Kira was no stranger to adversity. She had fought her way up from nothing, and now that she had a taste of power, she wasn't about to let go. If the galaxy wanted a fight, she would give it one. The silence of Tornatha's endless wasteland was shattered by the distant rumble of approaching dropships. The wind howled through the jagged cliffs, carrying with it the scent of ionized air and the unmistakable tension of an impending battle. Kira Arden stood atop a rocky outcrop, her eyes scanning the horizon where the Blackfang's fleet descended like a storm. Her fingers flexed around the hilt of her energy blade, the weight of what was to come pressing heavily on her shoulders. The Blackfangs had turned against her. It wasn't a surprise. Kira's rise within the mercenary crew had been swift, and with each victory, she had gained both allies and enemies. Captain Draxon, once a mentor and leader she had looked up to, had come to see her as a threat. His cold, calculating gaze, which had once watched her with curiosity and approval, had hardened over time. As her reputation grew, Draxon's control over the Blackfangs seemed to wane, and in a world where power meant survival, Draxon could not afford to appear weak. So he set a trap. The job had seemed straightforward at first, a simple raid on a rival syndicate's outpost deep in the outer reaches of the sector. But as Kira and her crew had landed on the planet, something felt wrong. The outpost was abandoned, too quiet, too still. And then she realized it wasn't the syndicate's outpost she needed to fear. It was Draxon. Her comm link buzzed in her ear. "Captain, we've got incoming 5 ships, Blackfang signatures. We're surrounded." Kira's jaw clenched. She had anticipated Draxon might make a move, but not this soon. Not this bold. "Pull back to defensive positions. We're not giving them an easy fight." Her crew, a motley mix of species who had come to trust her leadership, moved quickly, setting up fortifications within the abandoned outpost. They were skilled, loyal, and fierce, but they were outnumbered. Draxon's forces were overwhelming, and he was sending the message that no one, not even his most promising lieutenant, could challenge his authority and live. As the first dropships touched down, Kira watched the Blackfangs disembark. They moved with military precision, their black armor blending with the shadowed landscape, their weapons drawn and ready. At the front of the formation stood Draxon himself, his obsidian skin gleaming in the twilight. His eyes, glowing red like smoldering coals, locked onto Kira's position. "I gave you everything, Kira," Draxon's voice crackled through her comm, broadcast across the battlefield. "I let you rise through the ranks. I let you prove yourself. But you forgot your place." Kira didn't respond immediately. She had no illusions about what was about to happen. Draxon wasn't here to negotiate. This was an execution, plain and simple. But she wasn't about to go down without a fight. "I earned everything I have," Kira finally replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "I didn't forget my place. I made it." There was a pause on the other end, and then Draxon's voice dropped to a low, menacing tone. "Then this is where you fall." The battle erupted in an instant. Draxon's forces surged forward, their blasters lighting up the darkened landscape. Kira's crew held their ground, returning fire with everything they had. Energy bolts crackled through the air, striking the walls of the outpost and sending chunks of debris flying. The sound of combat echoed through the canyon, a cacophony of violence and desperation. Kira moved like a shadow, darting between cover and directing her crew with sharp, precise commands. Her twin energy blades hummed to life as she engaged in close combat, cutting down any Blackfangs who got too close. She had fought with these men and women before, shared victories and losses with them, but now they were enemy's tools in Draxon's quest to eliminate her. A hulking Valgorian charged at her, his forearms swinging massive hammers with deadly force. Kira ducked under the first blow and slid to the side, bringing her blade up in a fluid motion that sliced through his exposed side. He roared in pain and collapsed, but there was no time to catch her breath. Another mercenary was already closing in, a Gorak with a blade longer than her arm. Kira sidestepped the Gorak's strike, then spun low, sweeping his legs out from under him before delivering a quick, precise strike to his chest. He hit the ground, his body twitching as the energy from her blade surged through him. The battle raged on, and though Kira's crew fought fiercely, they were slowly being overwhelmed. Draxon had brought his elite mercenaries who had been with him for years, hardened by countless battles. They were relentless, and Kira knew that her crew couldn't hold out forever. Then, through the haze of combat, Kira saw him, Draxon, making his way toward her with the slow, deliberate steps of a predator who knew his prey was cornered. His black armor shimmered in the dim light, and his eyes burned with an intensity that sent a chill down Kira's spine. The battlefield seemed to quiet around them as Draxon approached, his massive form towering over the bodies of fallen mercenaries. Kira tightened her grip on her blades, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the final confrontation she had known was coming ever since she had started to rise through the ranks. "You were never going to win, Kira," Draxon said, his voice calm and cold. "I gave you every chance, but you pushed too far. Now, you'll die like the rest." Kira's eyes narrowed. "I don't need your chances, Draxon. And I'm not dying today." With a roar, Draxon charged, his strength and speed far greater than any opponent she had faced before. His fists came down like hammers, and Kira barely had time to raise her blades to deflect the blows. The impact sent a shockwave through her arms, nearly knocking her off balance. Draxon pressed his advantage, his strikes coming faster and harder, forcing Kira to retreat as she struggled to block each attack. She needed to find an opening. Draxon's strength was overwhelming, but he fought with brute force, relying on his raw power rather than finesse. Kira danced around him, using her agility to stay just out of reach, waiting for the right moment to strike. Draxon swung wide, his fist smashing into the ground where Kira had been standing moments before. As he overextended, Kira seized her chance. She spun behind him and slashed at the exposed joints of his armor, her blade sparking as they made contact. Draxon grunted in pain but quickly recovered, whirling around with a vicious backhand that caught Kira across the chest. She was thrown backward, hitting the ground hard, her breath knocked from her lungs. For a moment, the world spun around her, but she forced herself to roll to her feet, her vision clearing just in time to see Draxon advancing once more. "Your speed won't save you forever," Draxon growled, his voice low and dangerous. Kira wiped blood from her mouth and raised her blades again, her breathing ragged but steady. "I don't need forever," she said through gritted teeth. "Just long enough." Draxon roared and charged again, but this time Kira was ready. She ducked under his strike and slid between his legs, slashing at the back of his knees as she passed. Draxon stumbled, his movements slowing as the damage to his armor and body began to take its toll. Kira didn't let up. She spun around and drove one of her blades into his side, twisting it to send a surge of energy through his system. Draxon howled in fury and pain, but he wasn't done yet. With a desperate swing, he caught Kira across the shoulder, sending her crashing into a nearby wall. Pain exploded through her body, but she gritted her teeth and forced herself to stand. Draxon was staggering now, his movements sluggish, his armor sparking and smoking from the damage. But even wounded, he was still dangerous. Kira narrowed her focus. This was her moment. With a final burst of speed, she charged at Draxon, dodging his wild swings as she closed the distance. In one fluid motion, she vaulted over him, bringing both blades down into his exposed neck. Energy crackled through his body, and Draxen let out a final, guttural roar before collapsing to the ground. The battlefield went still. Kira stood over Draxen's fallen form, her chest heaving with exhaustion, her body battered and bruised. The Black Fangs who remained stopped fighting, their eyes wide with shock as they realized what had just happened. Their leader, the legendary Draxen, was dead. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, one by one, the surviving mercenaries began to lower their weapons. They had no leader now, and Kira had proven herself in the most definitive way possible. She had won. As the dust settled and the Black Fangs retreated, Kira stood alone on the battlefield, the weight of what had just transpired settling over her. She had risen through the ranks, fought her way to the top, and taken down the most feared mercenary leader in the sector. But the victory was bittersweet. She had lost comrades along the way, and the price of power was high. Now, with Draxen gone, the Black Fangs were hers to command or to disband. The choice was hers. Kira looked out over the wasteland of Tornath, the distant horizon bathed in the glow of the setting sun. She had earned her place here, through blood, sweat, and determination. But she knew that in this world, nothing was ever truly secure. Power was always fleeting, and there were always new enemies waiting in the shadows. But for now, she stood victorious.